A shy young woman, shaken after scratching a stranger's car, left behind a handwritten apology. She thought that would be the end of it, until the car's owner came looking for her. He didn't ask for money. He was a millionaire once, a filmmaker, a man whose heart had died alongside an unfinished dream. But something about her honesty, so simple, so small, made him want to try again, because sometimes a single scratch is where the first light finds its way in. That afternoon, the sky turned the color of old pewter, as if it had been dipped in a wash of grey paint. Autumn's chill crept into the pavement stones and clung to the metal frame of the bicycle she was wheeling beside her. She was small, thin, and moved with the kind of care that made it seem she was afraid her footsteps might disturb someone. At the edge of the parking lot near the park, a quiet spot at this hour, she parked her bike and tried to squeeze gently past a sleek, black car. But even with all her caution, a soft click sounded, barely audible. No one else would have noticed, but to her it rang out like a verdict. A scratch, no thicker than a fingernail, ran across the polished surface. She froze. A hand, flying to her mouth. No one had seen, no one would know. She could walk away, pretend nothing had happened, but she didn't. She opened her backpack, pulled out a sheet of paper, and, hands trembling, had to rewrite her note 3 times. The final one, in round, careful script, dotted with ink. Smudges from her sweaty fingers read, "I accidentally scratched your car. I'm very sorry, I don't have much, but I'll take responsibility. Even if you're angry, I hope you can forgive me. This is my phone number." She tucked the note under the windshield wiper. A light breeze lifted her brown hair across her face as she stood there, head bowed, the strands hiding almost everything but her eyes. She didn't take a photo of the scratch. Didn't try to explain. Just stood for a moment gazing at the car like she was apologizing with her eyes, then quietly wheeled her bike away. All afternoon, she couldn't focus on her lecture. The numbers on the slides floated past, in a language that felt foreign. All she could see was that car and that note, and the fear of someone furious demanding thousands of dollars. She lived alone, studied part-time, and worked weekends at a cafe. Her parents lived hours away, not wealthy, just getting by. Everything she owned was looked after carefully, because mistakes always came with a cost. Her phone stayed silent. Somehow that was scarier than any ringing. The next day, while riding to her shift at the bookstore, she saw the same car parked in the same spot. Her heart stuttered, but no one was inside. She passed it quickly, not daring to glance at the scratch. It was night when she left work. A crescent moon hung behind a veil of thin clouds. She reached for her bike key and saw a figure, a few feet away, leaning against the black car. The man wasn't young, maybe in his 40s. Black shirt, long coat, an old leather notebook in his hand. He didn't look at her right away, but when she stepped closer, his eyes found her curious, not angry, not judging. "You're the one who left the note yesterday?" She stopped, a simple question, but her heart beat like a drum. "Yes, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I can pay to fix it if—" "I didn't call," he interrupted, his voice calm and low. "I wanted to meet you in person." She bit her lip, eyes lowered. Her fingers gripped her backpack straps until her knuckles turned white. I don't really have much money, but I'll find a way." "You think I came here to ask you for money?" he said, a strange, soft laugh in his voice. For the first time, she looked up at him. The streetlight caught the line of his nose, the fine creases near his deep-set eyes. Not the face of someone rich and angry, more like someone surprised, pleasantly, by something in the middle of an otherwise quiet day. "Not everyone has the courage to admit a mistake," he said, "especially when no one's watching." She stayed silent. Part of her wanted her to believe him, but the rest, the part too used to blame to suspicion, didn't dare. "You know," he added, "sometimes a scratch can open the door to something new." She didn't fully understand, but his voice didn't sound like he was speaking just to her. Maybe he was talking to himself too. They parted without another word. He didn't ask for her number, didn't mention money. She rode, off into the night, lighter though not untroubled. In her mind his words echoed, "Sometimes a scratch can open the door to something new." Back at home, she pulled out the note she'd discarded the day before, the first draft, crumpled at the bottom of her bag. She smoothed it out, stared at her shaky handwriting, the ink smeared by sweat, and let out a quiet laugh. Part nervous, part relieved. She didn't know what would come next, but maybe, just maybe, today hadn't been a bad day after all. Tuesday morning. She woke earlier than usual, not because she had to, but because sleep had come in broken, flickering fragments. The black car, the note, the man's face. They had only spoken a few words the day before, yet his gaze lingered in her memory like a hush in the middle of a noisy street. She couldn't quite understand why, or perhaps she didn't dare believe it, that someone like him, wealthy and assured, would look at someone like her, a part-time student with a second-hand bike and a borrowed life, with such quiet sincerity. Not pity, not superiority, just something real. She stepped out of the dorm, her thin jacket pulled close around her slight frame. The morning air was crisp, and her breath disappeared into the mist like smoke. She'd planned to take the longer route to avoid the parking lot. She didn't want to run into him again. She wasn't ready for that fragile, uncertain feeling of having to explain herself to someone she couldn't quite place in her world. But when she reached the little cafe near campus, the one she always stopped at before her first class, she saw him. Not by chance. He was waiting, sitting at the farthest table under a canopy of warm golden bulbs that glowed like someone's gentle eyes in the middle of winter. He saw her first, raised a hand, not insistently. Just a quiet invitation, as if they'd known each other. Once in some old film she couldn't recall, she approached slowly. Her heart beat fast, not from fear this time, but from a nervous uncertainty. She didn't know what a man like him could possibly want from someone like her. "I figured you'd take this road today," he said, his voice like wind threading through bare branches. "I didn't think I'd see you again. I didn't think a handwritten apology would keep me up all night either," he smiled. She didn't respond, just lowered her eyes. Her fingers curled slightly around the strap of her backpack. The silence between them wasn't strained. It was soft, like background music meant only to be felt, not heard. He handed her a cup of warm milk coffee. "Did I get it right? I don't do bitter," she nodded lightly. "Me neither." She looked at him, really looked for the first time. His face bore the signs of someone who'd been through weather but hadn't let it strip the softness from his eyes. Worn but not hardened. "I used to think honesty was a given," he began, his voice growing quieter, "until I started noticing how rare it's become." She wasn't sure if he meant her or something else entirely, but inside that sentence, she sensed an unnamed sorrow. "I just thought, if I pretended nothing happened, I wouldn't be able to sleep," she said truthfully. He paused, then nodded. "There was a time," he said, "when I left a note too. I was younger. They didn't believe me. Called me a vandal. Cursed me out. After that, I stopped trying to explain." She looked at him, her eyes wide, and for a moment the gap between them, age, background, everything, folded in. Left only two people, both a little bruised by the times they tried to do the right thing and weren't met with kindness. "But yesterday," he continued, "I realized if someone like you still does the right thing, then maybe the things I used to believe in aren't completely lost." Her throat tightened. Not from emotion exactly, but from the unfamiliar sensation of being trusted by someone who owed her nothing. "My name's Caleb," he said after a pause. "Caleb, right. I'm Lila. Lila." He repeated it like a name from a language he once knew but hadn't spoken in years, foreign and strangely comforting. "What do you do?" she asked, the question slipping out more easily than she expected. "I used to make films. Now, I'm learning how to live again." She didn't fully understand what that meant, but it didn't matter. Just as he didn't ask her what she studied or where she lived or why she chose honesty when she could have walked away. Between them, there was a kind of recognition that didn't need a name. "I didn't come to ask for money," he said at last. "I just wanted to say thank you, and if you'll let me, I'd like to buy you breakfast. For scratching your car. for reminding me that sometimes the smallest things open the biggest doors. She smiled, a real one, her first of the morning. And so they sat there under the cafe's awning in the crisp morning light, sipping coffee and sharing pieces of their lives. Not quite strangers, not yet friends. Just two people who, for a brief quiet moment, happened to sit down inside the same tender coincidence of the world. Caleb took her to a place he called the world that fell asleep. It was an old movie theater hidden behind 2 rows of red brick buildings. The wooden sign was peeling, the glass doors clouded with dust and time. Once a place people flocked to. Now it held only slanting shafts of sunlight through forgotten windows and the familiar mustiness of things once beloved. "I used to work here," Caleb said, as he slowly pushed open the door. "In the early days I did everything. Wiping seats, changing bulbs, hanging posters. But every time a film played, I'd stand in the corner and pretend I was directing it." Lila stepped inside, flinching as the door's creak echoed. Through the hollow space. She didn't know why he'd brought her here, but she could feel it. Something important lived in this silence, something he hadn't said aloud before. "The first film I directed premiered right here," Caleb said, eyes lifted toward the faded screen. "It wasn't a success. The critics tore it apart. Investors pulled out. I lost almost everything, my reputation, my confidence." He sat in the center row, where the sound hits just right. Lila joined him, close enough to feel the quiet between them start to carry its own meaning. "Do you know what hurt the most?" Caleb turned to her, his voice low, his eyes heavy with memory. "Not the failure, the silence after that film. No one said anything. No advice, no criticism. Just nothing. As if I'd vanished." Lila said nothing. She understood. Silence has its own weight, especially when it comes from those who once believed in you. "I got a few offers after that," he continued, his tone flat, like narrating someone else's life. "But I turned them down. I was afraid of failing again, and worse, of having nothing left to lose." She looked at him and for a moment saw herself. The nameless fears, the quiet compromises, the way we retreat from what we love. Because it asks more courage than we think we have. "Time passed," he said. "I invested, real estate, stocks, whatever people said was smart. I made money. They called me a millionaire, but every time I saw a blank screen, something in me stayed empty." She exhaled softly. "Do you still have the script?" Caleb gave a wistful smile. "I do, but I haven't opened. Sat in years. I'd like to read it," she said after a pause. "If you'll let me." He turned to her, not surprised exactly, but moved, as if someone had reminded him that a door he thought was shut might still be waiting to open. "I thought I came to thank you," he said. "I didn't expect you'd make me wonder if I could begin again." "I don't know anything about filmmaking," Lila said with a small smile. "But I know what it's like to be afraid. And I think, if you wrote that story, it deserves at least one person to read it." Caleb looked at her. For the first time in years, someone saw him without flinching at his success or pitying his failure. She looked at him as if he still mattered, for reasons that had nothing to do with money or legacy. "Then I'll let you read it," he said. "But you have to promise me one thing." "What?" "Be honest. Even if you hate it. Even if it's awful. Tell me the truth." She nodded without hesitation. He stood, walked to the back of the theater, and disappeared into the old projection room. Minutes later, he returned with a stack of yellowed pages wrapped in a battered cardboard cover. In the corner, faded, words read "Scene 57, rewrite pending." "I never wrote the ending," he said quietly. "I was too afraid to face it." She took the manuscript, her hands trembling not from its weight but from everything it carried. The pain, the hope. The years of silence pressed between each page. She said nothing more, only held it a little tighter, as if making a promise no one else could hear. Lila didn't sleep much that night. The manuscript Caleb had given her still held the scent of old paper, soft and nostalgic, like a memory pressed between the pages of a forgotten book. She kept it on her desk, beside a cold cup of tea and the quiet glow of her desk lamp. She didn't read it like someone trained to. She wasn't a screenwriter. She didn't know how to judge arcs or pacing or the architecture of 3 acts. But she read with feeling, with her own trembling, her own quiet fears, her own unspoken things. The story was about a man who had once made a living telling stories, but after a sudden loss, lived only in the past. He drifted through old cinemas, unfinished scenes, conversations he never dared to write to the end. Near the final pages, a girl appeared, not to save him, but simply to listen. When she reached scene 57, the last scene, it was empty. Only a faint note scribbled at the bottom. Rewrite pending, but maybe silence is enough. She read that line over and over, not because it was difficult, but because it felt like it was about her. She tore a corner from a sheet of paper and wrote something by hand, not as an editor, but as someone adding a single note to an unfinished melody. Nothing grand, no analysis, just words, her. Hart understood. The next morning she brought the manuscript back to the old theatre. Caleb was already waiting in the cafe next door, his espresso cooling on the table, his expression as it had been the day before, calm but carrying a quiet expectancy. "I thought you'd take a week," he said when she stepped in. "So did I," she smiled softly. She handed him the manuscript. A small slip of paper was tucked inside, nestled at scene 57. No explanation, no markings, just there, like a breath someone had left behind. Caleb opened it. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the ache of touching something that had been silent for too long. He read. The room fell into stillness, only the faint tick of a wall clock and the slow movement of light across the window pane. "And if you believe silence is the last thing worth saying, then I think silence only has meaning when someone listens closely enough to know it's not empty." He stopped at the final line. His hand rested on the page, unmoving. "I wrote that," she said gently, "because if you end the story in silence, the audience might think you had nothing left to say, but I think you do. You're just afraid no one will hear it." Caleb didn't look up at once. He kept his eyes on the paper, as if rereading it. Not with his eyes, but with something deeper. "That sentence," he said, his voice low and steady, "you wrote it from someplace very deep inside you, didn't you?" Lila didn't answer. She didn't need to. He closed the manuscript slowly. When he looked at her again, something had shifted in his eyes. Not simple emotion, but a kind of gratitude so whole it felt sacred, like someone had just returned a piece of his life he hadn't realized was still missing. "You have no idea what you've just done," he said. "Not just for this story, but for me." Lila lowered her gaze and smiled. She didn't need to understand it all. It was enough to know that what she'd written hadn't been ignored. They left the cafe together, saying nothing more about the script or the ending. But something had changed. In the rhythm of their steps, in the quiet between their words, it was clear. Something new had begun, not as mentor and student, not even as collaborators, but as two people who had once lived in silence, now learning gently how to speak again. The small room in the old theatre became their near-daily refuge. It wasn't an office, not even a proper workspace, just a worn wooden table, 2 wobbly chairs, and soft light slanting through a dust-veiled window. But to Caleb and Lila, it was quiet enough to hear themselves think. They didn't dive into writing right away. In those early days, they mostly sat with takeaway coffee and talked about film scenes that had left them breathless, books that made them cry for reasons they couldn't name, or simply the damp, familiar scent of the theatre's wood and walls. Some days they'd spend nearly 3 hours debating a single look in scene 2. Should the man meet her eyes, or look away? Should he stay silent, or smile faintly as she walked off? For the first time in years, Caleb picked up a pen again. His hand moved slowly, sometimes pausing mid-sentence as if the words were still shaking off the dust of disuse. Lila. Scribbled in blue ink, tiny notes, lines of dialogue, or just a quiet question mark beside a paragraph. There was no hierarchy between them. No one better, just mutual respect. a kind of co-creation Caleb had never experienced before. Not a junior writer, not an assistant, but an equal voice, even if hers was younger, even if she had never written a script. Every time. "I write," Lila said one afternoon as they paused, sunlight catching the rim of her empty teacup. "It feels like I'm answering a question I don't know how to ask aloud. And I write like I'm searching for an old house I thought was torn down," Caleb replied, smiling faintly. The script began to change. It was no longer just a story about a man who had lost his passion. It became the journey of two people, one who had once lost his voice and one who'd never believed hers was worth hearing, learning together how to write what they never thought they could. One morning, as they reread the newest draft of Scene 57, a stranger stepped into the theater. His name was Marcus, a film producer, hair silvered with age, carrying the presence of someone who'd lived long in the industry but hadn't lost his sensitivity. He had worked with Caleb years ago and still made a habit of visiting the old cinema every weekend like a quiet ritual. "I heard someone's breathing life back into this place," Marcus said, spotting the manuscript in Caleb's hands. "You're writing again." Caleb hesitated, not out of embarrassment, but because he wasn't sure he was ready to call what they were doing a comeback. "Not alone this time," he said, glancing at Lila, who was gathering pages on the table. Marcus read a few pages. He didn't say much, his expression remained unreadable, but his brow furrowed not with displeasure but with focus. "She wrote this line?" he asked, pointing to a bit of dialogue in the middle of a scene. "She helped me realize it needed a new voice." Marcus nodded, then fell into a long, thoughtful silence. Before leaving, he set a business card on the table. "If the two of you are serious, give me a call. Maybe it won't become a film, but it's worth hearing more." After he left, Caleb turned to Lila. Something in his gaze lit with a kind of fragile brightness, like sunlight breaking through thick cloud. "You just made me remember something," he said. "What's that?" "That it's not only the people with big ideas who get to make films, it's the ones who believe their story is worth telling." Lila said nothing. But something inside her unfurled, a small green shoot after a long, quiet winter. They didn't rush to call Marcus, didn't make plans. But from that day on, they wrote more steadily, a little each day. Not because of ambition, not for the hope of production, but because, finally, their words felt like they had found a way forward. The meeting room wasn't large, but the white light from the ceiling made everything feel brittle and sharp, as if emotion had no place there, hidden beneath lines of logic, budget breakdowns, and a dozen variations of the same question. But, will it sell? Caleb sat at the head of the table. Across from him were Marcus and two investors, one younger, slicked-back hair, eyes fixed on a tablet, the other older, thick glasses, sipping coffee he never seemed to swallow. Lila sat beside Caleb, her hands folded in her lap, damp with sweat. She had prepared everything, the story's arc, her defense of the ending, examples of films that moved audiences with emotional honesty. But nothing could prepare her for those evaluating stares, not unkind, just quietly clinical. The kind that made her feel like a schoolgirl again, waiting to be called to the front of the class. The current ending. "It's too vague," the younger investor said. "Audiences today need clarity. A kiss, a hug, something that hints at the future." Caleb opened his mouth, but Lila spoke first. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Because it's not a story about ending." Every eye turned to her. She swallowed and continued. "People don't need the characters to kiss to believe they'll be okay. What they need is something real. To see someone who gave up choose to try again. To see a girl who thought she was invisible write her voice into the world for the first time." The older man frowned. "You're suggesting it ends with inner monologue? No visual resolution?" "Not all clarity is powerful," Lila answered. "Sometimes the power is in what's left unsaid." Caleb turned to look at her. He didn't interrupt, not because he didn't want to, but because for the first time he saw her stand for something. Not for him, but for the story that had become theirs. "This isn't a film about action," she went on. "It's a film about interiority, about small things, A scratch on a car, a handwritten note, an unfinished script. All the moments that seem meaningless but quietly change a life. Silence settled over the room. Then Marcus smiled, just barely, a flicker at the corner of his mouth. He nodded slowly like a man remembering why he began in this business at all. "We invest," Marcus said, "not only in what's guaranteed to sell, but in what might move someone." The younger investor nodded reluctantly, though his expression stayed cautious. The older one said nothing more, but he didn't object. On the walk home, Caleb was quiet for a long while. They strolled through still streets, the season shifting toward winter, the wind already tinged with dryness, with the beginning of cold. "I used to think it was my job to protect this story," he said finally, not looking at her. "But today I realized it's not just mine anymore." Lila said nothing. She didn't need to. What she knew, what she felt in her chest, was that for the first time, her voice hadn't trembled when she spoke what she believed. Not because she had grown stronger, but because she understood. If she didn't speak for it, no one else would. "I'm proud of you," Caleb said softly. She looked ahead. The streetlights were flickering on now, casting golden light across the bare-limbed trees. There was no music in her head, no applause, and just a stillness, the kind that only those who have been afraid truly recognize, the stillness that comes when you finally stepped through fear. She was no longer the girl who left a trembling apology under a windshield wiper. She was the one rewriting the ending, not just of a script, but of herself. The afternoon settled slowly, as if the world itself was gently bracing for something important, something that didn't need to announce its arrival. The sun slipped behind brick rooftops, casting a golden hue over the narrow street where the old cinema still stood, quiet but never forgetful of why it remained. There was no red carpet, no photographers, no tuxedos or sweeping gowns, just a wooden sign propped outside, chalk written in soft white strokes. Tonight. One story, two hearts, countless silences. Lila stood at the doorway in a simple pale blue dress, her hair pinned back, arms wrapped around the worn notebook where she'd once scribbled the first lines of scene 57. Her heart raced, not from fear of failure, but from the tremor of being seen, truly seen for the first time through every word, every glance on screen. Inside, Caleb adjusted the projector one last time. Under the amber glow of the ceiling lights, he looked nothing like the man who had once hidden behind past acclaim. There was something in his eyes now, something quietly lit, as if he'd just reclaimed a part of himself long thought lost. No more than 30 people came. Old friends of Caleb, a few of Lila's colleagues, the woman from the cafe where they'd first sat together, the retired theater guard still carrying the key to the projection room like a relic. When the lights dimmed and the screen lit up, Lila held her breath. The film lasted under an hour. No special effects, no shocking twists, no crashing climaxes. Just still frames, sparse dialogue, and long, deliberate silences, where characters simply looked at one another or said nothing at all. And yet, within those silences, something stirred. In the scene where the man stands alone in the empty cinema, facing a blank screen, Lila saw that Caleb had chosen the exact angle from the day he first spoke of his failure. In the moment where the girl slips a note beneath a windshield wiper, the camera held still. So still you could hear her breath, the breeze, the trembling of a kindness no one witnessed. Then, the ending, not dialogue exactly, but a woman's. Her voice, soft and almost weightless like smoke. Not everyone has the courage to speak, but if someone is listening, then even silence becomes a language. The screen faded to black. There was no burst of applause. Just a few long exhales, a quiet sniffle or two unhidden. Someone whispered from the back, "That was me once." Lila looked at Caleb. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Everything had already been said, frame by frame. After the screening, people gathered in the courtyard. A tea table, a plate of homemade cookies, and strings of soft lights hung above their heads. One of Caleb's old friends clinked glasses with Lila and said, "That story, it was honest. Thank you for not giving it an easy ending." A middle-aged woman, someone Lila didn't know, took her hand gently and said, "I was silent for years. watching that. I saw myself. Lila didn't know what to say. She only smiled, light as a breeze. When the courtyard had emptied, only the two of them remained. Caleb sat on the steps outside the door, shoes dusted with the evening stillness. Lila sat beside him, leaning lightly against his shoulder. "I was thinking," she said, "if someone asked me whether this was the ending or the beginning, what would I say?" Caleb smiled, eyes on the quiet night sky. "I'd say it doesn't matter, as long as we keep writing." They sat there, in the hush between stars and streetlight, not needing their story to close, because what mattered most had already been told. The first rain of the season arrived without warning the next morning. Fine droplets tapped a steady rhythm against the window of the room where Lila sat, at her small writing desk beside a cactus and the familiar amber glow of her desk lamp. On the table lay the final printout of the script, no longer bearing its old title. The new title was simple, Scene 57. She had rewritten the ending, not because anyone asked her to, not for investors, not for audiences, not for critics, but because something quiet and insistent had risen from within, a need to tell the story again in the gentlest, truest way she could. In this version, the female character didn't say much. No one confessed love, no dramatic camera spins, or swelling music. She simply sat in a cafe, opened a notebook, and began to write, not to send to anyone, not to publish, just to hold on to the thing that had once silenced her, and finally to let it speak. Caleb read the new version alone in the old theater. The screen was still blank. No one else was there. Just him, the pages, and the flickering light of the aging projector. He read slowly, each line like a breath. When he reached the end, he paused, not because he didn't understand, but because he understood too well. We don't get to choose when the story starts, but we can always rewrite the ending. A short line. But to him, it wasn't just a line in a script. It was forgiveness, a greeting, an opening for everything yet to come. The following week, Lila visited her parents in the suburbs. She brought the manuscript, not to boast, but to slide it quietly onto the old bookshelf in her childhood room, as a small, silent symbol of something she once thought she'd never be able to do. Her mother glanced at the stack of pages and smiled softly. "You used to write diary entries on the back of bread wrappers. Now you've written an entire film." Lila smiled, brushing her hand along the spine. "I just rewrote the things I used to be afraid of." On another afternoon, Caleb invited her for a walk through the park, where everything had first begun. The trees had shed their leaves. The bench where she'd once sat trembling, writing an apology, was still there, but freshly painted now. "I used to think endings were always sad," Caleb said. "But maybe I just never waited long enough to see them through." "An ending isn't where a story dies," Lila replied. "It's where it no longer needs to be explained." They didn't hold hands. They didn't need to. There was no cinematic romance. But in the glance they shared between matching footsteps, there was peace, as if everything had quietly fallen into place. Winter crept in, slowly but surely. One morning, Lila sat by the window, pen in hand, not writing a screenplay this time, but a letter. "Dear the one who once feared they weren't enough, I used to think a scratch was a sign of failure. But now I know, it's just the place where the light gets in. Thank you for stopping to read the note I left behind, because if you hadn't, this story might never have begun. At the bottom of the frame, if this were a film, there would be a girl sitting in a quiet room, morning light spilling across the floor, her hand resting on a blank page. No soundtrack, just the sound of pen against paper, like the soft exhale of someone who has finally found the courage to tell her own story, and the story, it's not over. It's just been written anew." If you've ever felt like the small things you do go unnoticed, remember this: sometimes a simple apology can rewrite an entire life. If this story touched you, leave a like, a comment, or simply share it with someone who might need a reminder that kindness always speaks, even in silence. And don't forget to hit subscribe so we can keep walking through stories like this together. Because who knows, maybe in the next video, you'll see a little piece of yourself there, too.